Something knocked at my gate before dawn, so light it could have been the wind begging to be let in. The blizzard was already chewing on the hill, turning my driveway into a white throat that swallowed sound. In my world, people did not come here uninvited. They called. They waited. They feared the answer. I woke anyway, heart steady, instincts sharp, the kind of alarm no system can buy. The mansion held its usual silence. A disciplined silence, expensive and obedient. Marble under my feet bit cold through the thin skin of sleep. Portraits of men who built this empire watched me from the walls, their painted eyes daring anyone to disturb what they died for. At the top of the stairs, my head of security met me, face tight in the half-light. He didn't need to raise his voice. The problem was already in his posture. There was someone at the gate, not a rival, not a messenger. A child, alone, refusing to leave. A child. That word didn't belong behind my iron bars. It didn't belong in a place where I kept my power like a weapon. Polished, ready, pointed outward. I pulled on my black coat and stepped into the storm. The cold hit like punishment. Snow drove sideways, stinging my cheeks, filling my lungs with ice. The gate rose out of the whiteout, ornate iron disappearing into drifts, and there she was, a small shape pressed against it, like the storm had spat her out and forgotten to finish the job. Lily Reed, maybe 6, maybe less, wrapped in a thin jacket that looked like paper compared to the weather. Her hair was crusted with ice, lashes clumped, cheeks raw, both hands gripped the bars until her knuckles went pale, stubborn as sin. My guards waited behind me for a nod, a dismissal, a clean ending. I didn't give it. I looked at her and felt something shift, not fear, not pity, something closer to unease. Because she wasn't pleading, she wasn't bargaining. Her lips moved, and what reached me wasn't a request. It was a fact, delivered with the blunt faith only kids carry, as if truth itself could force the world to behave. Her mother didn't come home last night. The sentence hung between us, heavier than the storm. In the space of a breath, I understood the real danger. Not the child at my gate. The reason she chose my gate at all. And before my mind could argue, my body leaned toward the lock, already deciding to let her in. I could pretend this wasn't my business, but the storm had pushed her into mine, and it wouldn't release her yet. I didn't nod to my guards. I moved. The iron lock was stiff with ice, the keyhole packed with snow that had blown sideways all night. These were the same hands that signed orders, held guns, ended arguments, war hands. Yet in that moment my fingers felt thick, clumsy, almost wrong, as if the cold had reached inside and rearranged me. I scraped the frost away, worked the key, forced the mechanism to turn. Metal complained. The gate opened with a groan that vanished into the storm. Lily tried to step forward and her knees gave out. I caught her before her face hit the iron. She was so light it shocked me, a bundle of wet fabric and bones, trembling hard enough to rattle my coat buttons. Her hair was crunchy with ice. Her cheeks were the color of raw meat. When I pulled her closer, cold seeped through wool like it had teeth. Too cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just hurt, it erases. I lifted her against my chest, tucking her into the shelter of my coat. One arm under her legs, the other braced around her back. She clung without thinking, fingers hooking into the lapel like it was the last solid thing in the world. The walk back up the drive felt longer than it ever had. Behind me the guards followed, silent, ready for an enemy that wasn't there. Inside, the mansion's heat hit like a wall. It should have been enough. It wasn't. Lily kept shaking, her body refusing to believe warmth existed. I carried her through the foyer and into the library where the fireplace ran tall, flames licking at logs with hungry patience. I set her on the leather sofa, closest to the fire, and my hands hovered over her like I could command her to be okay. I knew how to control rooms. I didn't know how to warm a child. Mrs. Alvarez appeared before anyone could announce her, small and fast, with blankets piled in her arms. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for my approval. She wrapped Lily in layers of wool and cashmere the way you wrap something breakable, murmuring comforts I didn't need to hear to understand. The shaking softened from violent to small, stubborn shivers. I pulled a chair close and sat forward, elbows on my knees, keeping my voice low the way I did when I wanted truth without fear. I asked her name. I watched her lips form it like it cost effort to push sound through chattering teeth. Lily. Then I asked about her mother, and the answer landed in my stomach with a new kind of weight. Harper Reed, a bartender. She worked nights at the Velvet Crown. The Velvet Crown wasn't just a casino in my city. It was my casino, hidden behind paperwork and distance, protected by men who swore nothing slipped past them. And yet a woman from my own floor plan had vanished into the cracks, leaving her child to climb my hill through a storm to find me. If this happened under my roof, it wasn't bad luck. It was my blind spot, and I could already feel the decision hardening, the same way ice forms when the temperature drops, sudden, absolute, and dangerous. By the time the cocoa steam stopped shaking in front of her face, Lily's shivers had turned into small aftershocks beneath Mrs. Alvarez's blankets. The fire snapped, throwing orange light across the spines of books nobody touched, and I stayed in my chair like moving away might make her disappear. My house was built for quiet orders, not for a child's breathing to matter this much. What she told me came in pieces, the way kids hand you truth without realizing it can cut. Harper had a rule. Every night, no matter how late the bar kept her, she called before she stepped outside. Not a long call, not a sweet one, just a quick tether to say she was on her way. Lily repeated it like a prayer. The way you repeat something that has always worked. Something you trust more than locks and alarms. Last night, the tether never came. She had waited beside the phone anyway, curled on the couch with her coat still on, because the apartment didn't hold heat the way my mansion did. At some point her eyes had closed. She woke up and the windows were still black, and the silence was so complete it felt like the world had stopped. No footsteps, no key in the door, no voice from the kitchen, just that dead phone and a room that got colder by the minute because they'd run out of heating oil. I pictured a 6-year-old pulling a thin blanket higher, trying to breathe quietly so she wouldn't waste warmth, and something ugly tightened behind my ribs. In my territory, emergencies are supposed to be loud. Gunfire, sirens, threats you can measure. But poverty makes emergencies normal. It teaches people to wait through dangers that should never be routine, because there's no other option. How many nights had Harper been exhausted and still dialed that number so her kid wouldn't sit in fear? How many times had my city let them slide by unnoticed? Lily explained why she came here instead of anywhere sensible. A neighbor, someone who watched over her sometimes, had told her I was the boss of everything, the man who could find what went missing. The neighbor had even used the word fair, as if fairness lived behind my gates like another security system. Fair. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. Yet Lily believed it with the whole force of her small body. She had walked through a blizzard on that belief. Now it sat in my library, staring at me like a dare. I felt cornered by a child's faith, and the corner had teeth. If I let this slide, I wasn't just ignoring a missing bartender. I was proving that the only thing I ruled was fear. My hand drifted toward my phone, and the decision finished forming. In the next breath, my empire was going to start searching for her. For answers. For the human part of me. Mrs. Alvarez set a bowl of soup and a mug of cocoa on the table by the sofa, and Lily's eyes followed them like they were proof the world still worked. I watched her take careful sips, watched her shoulders sink a fraction closer to the blankets. Then I forced myself to stand. Leaving that room felt wrong, like stepping away from a ledge, but I needed answers more than comfort. I told myself she was safe with the fire, the food, and Mrs. Alvarez's steady hands. My office was colder than the rest of the house, dawn light struggling through windows frosted at the edges. The city lay below the hill, buried under snow that made every street look identical, every rooftop smooth as a lie. I picked up my phone without checking the time. The Velvet Crown had a manager whose job was to be awake when my number appeared. I called, and when he answered, I stripped my voice down to business. A bartender named Harper Reed hadn't gone home, and I wanted her location now. No greetings, no explanations. I gave him a deadline and 2 outcomes, and I meant both. 15 minutes to tell me where she was, or 15 minutes to clear out his desk and disappear from my payroll before I made the decision for him. The words came out clean, efficient, the same way I handled every problem in my territory. Except my chest felt tight in a way I didn't recognize, because a child was waiting by my fireplace, believing I could fix this. I stared out at the white city and listened to my own silence. My empire ran on information, on people reporting what moved and what didn't, on cameras and favors and fear. Yet Harper had vanished inside something I owned, and nobody had bothered to notice until Lily walked into a blizzard to tell me. I wondered how many small disasters lived in the cracks of my power, how many phones didn't ring in apartments nobody visited. My screen stayed dark. Minutes ticked past like footsteps in a hall. The phone rang at 12 minutes. I answered before the second buzz finished, and the manager's relief spilled through the line. He had found her. She was still at the Velvet Crown, not missing in the streets, but forgotten in a back room. After her shift, she'd collapsed on an old break room couch, burning with fever, too weak to stand, too disoriented to get home. The night supervisor had signed off without checking the back halls. The manager kept talking, offering reasons, but I was already reaching for my coat. The storm outside felt secondary now. If she'd been lying there all night, then my territory hadn't just failed her, it had abandoned her. And I was done waiting. I stepped back into the library long enough to see Lily's small shape by the fire, then turned toward the garage, deciding I would drive myself right now, alone. I grabbed my keys with the same hand that had silenced my phone, and I walked past the driver waiting by the door. Waiting felt like suffocation. The black SUV started under my own grip, tires biting the cleared drive, then slipping onto the hill road into the white morning. Snowplows hadn't reached every street, so I threaded through lanes of churned slush and untouched drifts. Fast, but not reckless. The city looked abandoned, windows dark, sidewalks erased. My mind kept returning to Lily by my fire, counting minutes like heartbeats, and wondering who lets a woman vanish indoors today. The velvet crown announced itself with neon that looked tired in daylight, half buried by snow on the sign's ledge. The parking lot held only a few staff cars. I used my key, not the front door ritual, and stepped inside alone before anyone could prepare a lie for me. The gaming floor was a ghost of itself. Slot machines sat dark, tables covered, chandeliers humming over emptiness. The air mixed stale smoke, spilled liquor, and sharp cleaner, as if someone tried to erase the night. My footsteps felt too loud on carpet in a place built to swallow sound. The manager met me near the back hallway, pale, hands twisting, words tumbling in apology and procedure. I didn't slow down for any of it. His explanations were just another kind of snow, piling up to hide what mattered. I walked past him without looking because the clock was running. The back hall narrowed into staff doors and cinder block walls, the parts customers never see. A break room waited at the end, dim and stale. Harper Reed lay half on, half off a worn couch, blanket thrown over her like an afterthought, skin flushed and wet with fever burning inside. Her lips moved soundlessly, shaping a name again and again, the same one that sat by my fireplace. Hearing Lily in that ruined whisper lit a clean rage in me. How does someone disappear inside my own place? Who decided she wasn't worth checking on? It wasn't her fault. Ever. I dropped to one knee and pressed my fingers to her forehead. Heat surged into my skin, frighteningly high, like a furnace behind thin bone. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, fighting for one thought: getting home. When I lifted her, she weighed almost nothing, all exhaustion and will in my arms. I carried her out the way I'd carried Lily, except this time the bundle was grown and somehow more fragile. The back door opened to an alley piled with drifts. Cold slapped us. I stripped off my coat and covered her, stepping carefully over ice that wanted me to fall. Getting her into the back seat took both patience and force, angling her limp body onto the leather, propping her head, making sure she kept breathing. The engine idled, ready. Found wasn't saved. My phone began buzzing with the day's problems, but I silenced it and drove toward the hospital. Traffic was waking up, brake lights blinking against snow, but nothing pulled my attention from the mirror where Harper lay under my coat. Time was the enemy now, not rivals. Calls stacked up unanswered. I didn't care. The emergency entrance waited ahead, and I drove straight for it without hesitation. Hospital doors slid open as I carried Harper inside, and the world changed in one step. Snow and engine exhaust gave way to antiseptic and heat that felt artificial, like it belonged to machines. Fluorescent lights flattened everything, turning skin gray and eyes tired. A nurse looked up, not impressed by my coat or my posture, only by the limp woman in my arms. I moved fast, ignoring the painted warnings about parking, ignoring the stairs. In my world, rules bend. Here, the rules were welded in place. A stretcher appeared, hands reaching for her, and for a second my arms tightened, as if letting go would mean losing control of the outcome. I forced myself to lower her onto the thin mattress and watched them clip on monitors, check pulses, ask questions that mattered more than my name. I answered like I was giving orders, because it kept panic from leaking into my voice. High fever, unconscious for hours, possible cold exposure, dehydrated, exhausted, likely sick before she collapsed. I saw the staff register the facts, not the power. They moved with practiced speed, but it was their speed, not mine. Then the double doors swallowed her, and my hands were empty in the brightest room I had ever stood in. Around me, other emergencies waited in plastic chairs, A man pressed gauze to his hand. A mother rocked a coughing kid. Nobody cared that I owned half the street outside. Money could buy silence, but it could not buy the clock. At registration, a clerk slid forms across the counter and looked at me with the calm of someone who had seen every kind of desperation. The first question hit harder than the storm did. Was I family? The word sat in my mouth like a foreign coin. Family meant blood, marriage, history. It meant a right to know. I had none of those. I admitted it. I didn't even know Harper's middle name, her medical history, her insurance. All I knew was the fever on my palm. The way she murmured Lily as if that name was the rope holding her to life. I told the clerk Lily was safe at my house, wrapped in blankets, waiting by my fire. The clerk softened, but the rules stayed firm. Without consent or legal tie, the doctors might say nothing. I could have thrown money at the desk, but the clerk's eyes stayed level. The hospital ran on protocols, not fear. I signed where I had to, swallowing the insult of being powerless. And I realized this was what normal people lived with every day, hoping strangers would care enough for them too. So I sat down with a pen and filled in what I could, leaving blanks that felt like accusations. I wrote Harper Reed. I wrote bartender. I wrote the Velvet Crown. I wrote my number where an emergency contact should be, knowing how strange that looked. My phone buzzed with messages from men who expected me to respond. I turned it face down. For once, my empire could wait. Minutes stretched into something heavier. I stared at the doors and kept asking myself what it meant that I was still here, still waiting like everyone else. When a doctor finally came out, the relief landed before the words did. Harper was stable. Severe flu complications layered on dehydration and exhaustion. Another few hours without treatment and the ending would have been different. The doctor added that Harper kept fighting sleep, trying to get up, asking for her daughter. Hearing that pulled me straight back to Lily's small face by my fireplace. I texted Mrs. Alvarez to bring Lily to the hospital now, with a warm coat, no delays. Then I asked for one thing I couldn't command. 5 minutes beside Harper's bed, just enough to see her breathing and believe stable was real, before Lily arrived. The doctor let me slip behind the curtain for a few minutes, nothing more. The room was narrow, crowded by machines that blinked like quiet sentries. Harper lay still, an IV line taped to her arm, her breathing shallow but steady under thin blankets, and my pulse eased at last. Up close I saw what the casino lights had hidden. Calluses on her fingers, a bruise on one knuckle, the pale crescent marks where she had bitten her nails down. Exhaustion had carved shadows under her eyes. Even sedated, her mouth moved as if searching for Lily still refusing rest. I'd faced men who begged for mercy, and men who promised loyalty, and I knew how to read the angle in every breath. Harper's need was different. It wasn't for money or favor. It was a single certainty. Her child was safe, warm, and not alone until morning came again. When I stepped back into the hall, the hospital noise returned like weather. Wheels squeaked, monitors beeped, voices rose and fell behind curtains. Mrs. Alvarez texted that she was pulling up. My hands went cold again, not from snow but from anticipation. Would Lily forgive the hours I wasted outside? Lily burst through the entrance with her hat crooked and her cheeks still red from wind. She saw me and her whole body turned into motion, relief and fear tangled together. I dropped to my knees, steadying her shoulders, letting my calm do the talking until her breathing slowed again. I took her hand and guided her down the corridor, keeping my pace measured, like speed might shatter her. Nurses glanced at her and softened without trying. Lily's small fingers tightened around mine as we reached the curtain. I could feel her hope pushing ahead of us into the room. Inside, Harper stirred at the sound of her child, eyes fluttering as if fighting sleep and fear at once. Lily climbed onto the bed carefully, avoiding wires by instinct. Harper's arms wrapped around her with fierce precision, like she could stitch Lily back into her own body, lock the seam. I stepped back to the doorway, suddenly aware of my size, my coat, my reputation, all of it useless here. Their embrace wasn't polite. It didn't bargain, or thank, or calculate. It demanded. Watching it, I wondered what kind of man could witness this and still choose emptiness after today. Harper's eyes found mine over Lily's hair. Gratitude was there, undeniable, but it shared space with warning. She was measuring me the way survivors measure strangers, looking for the hook on the gift. I held her gaze and admitted, silently, that I didn't know my own motive, yet only urgency. Still a decision settled in me like weight. They couldn't heal in a freezing apartment where silence meant danger. They couldn't heal in this hospital forever. I had rooms no one used and heat that never failed. If love was this fierce, it deserved a place to breathe without fear. I told myself it would be simple. A roof and time, nothing owed. Not a transaction, not a chain. Just shelter until Harper could stand steady and decide her next step. Yet my chest tightened at the thought of them leaving. That frightened me more than any rival ever had. When the nurse signaled visiting time was ending, I squeezed Lily's hand and stepped into the hall again. I could see the fight coming in Harper's eyes, the refusal to accept pity. I would offer my home anyway, and then I would have to learn how to honor her pride. Discharge planning moved with the hospital's steady rhythm, like the building itself had a pulse. Harper sat upright now, not strong, just stubborn enough to look alive on her own terms. Lily stayed close, tucked into a chair with Mrs. Alvarez's scarf around her neck, watching every adult face like she was learning which ones told the truth. The doctor's outline was simple and brutal. Harper needed rest, fluids, time off work, follow-ups, and at least a couple weeks without the kind of nights that grind you down. The math behind that plan was just as clear. No shifts meant no tips. No tips meant rent still due, and the heating oil that had already run out wasn't going to refill itself because someone survived the flu. A child still needed breakfast. A landlord still wanted money. Winter didn't care about medical notes. I offered the only solution I could give fast. My house had heat that never failed, food that appeared without counting dollars, and security that kept strangers from walking into your life. I framed it in my head as no strings, just a place to recover until Harper could stand steady again. But even as I formed the offer, I understood how it would land. A powerful man offering shelter to a vulnerable woman never sounds clean. It sounds like a trap wearing a warm coat. Harper's pride rose before her body did. I saw it in the way her jaw set, in the way she kept one hand on Lily like a boundary line. She didn't melt with gratitude. She didn't collapse into relief. She pushed back, and the push wasn't dramatic. It was survival talking. She wasn't going to become a story people told about the boss keeping a single mom in his mansion. She wasn't going to let Lily learn that safety always comes with a price. I'm used to buying solutions. Money, pressure, fear, favors. One phone call and the world rearranges itself. Harper didn't rearrange. She stayed where she was and forced me to hear her terms without hiding behind my authority. She wanted Lily safe, yes, but she wanted her dignity intact just as badly. Temporary shelter, only long enough to recover, only if she could work and repay, and only if Lily's well-being was never treated like leverage. She made it clear in her posture and her eyes. Lily was not a bargaining chip. That hit me in a place I didn't like to admit existed, because part of me wanted to protect them so hard it bordered on possession, and another part of me recognized how quickly protection can turn into a cage. I asked myself a question I'd never asked before. Was I offering a home, or was I building a prettier kind of control? So I adapted. Not with charm, not with promises, with structure. My household ran on staff, schedules, pay, clear expectations. Once she was well enough, she could take a role there if she wanted it. Paid work, defined hours, a path to leave when she chose. Not a debt she'd owe forever, just a bridge she could cross without losing herself. I made it an option, not an order. Because the moment I turned it into an order, I would prove her fears right. While we talked, my phone kept vibrating in my pocket like a second heartbeat. Messages from lieutenants, missed calls, updates I would normally answer within minutes. I ignored them until the buzz became a roar. When I finally stepped into the hallway to return one call, I heard the shift in my own world before anyone said it plainly. My absence had been noticed. My priorities had been noticed. And in my line of work, being noticed is dangerous. Rumors move faster than snow. The city didn't need facts. It needed a shape of a story. The boss carried a woman into the hospital. The boss waited like a normal man. The boss brought a child to see her mother. Men who never cared about my private life now cared very much. Soft spots are invitations. If I had one, someone would test it. A lieutenant tried to circle the subject with careful concern, the kind that pretends to be loyalty. I shut it down with a few clipped words and a tone that ended conversations. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inwardly, everything did. If I brought Harper and Lily behind my gates, could I keep them safe from the kind of attention my world generates? Or would I be dragging them closer to the very danger I'd sworn to shield them from? Back in the room, Harper watched me like she could sense the shadow passing over my thoughts. She didn't ask for details. She just held her ground. In the end, she accepted the arrangement on her terms. Temporary, until she was strong enough to stand alone again. I agreed, and meant it, even as something tightened in my chest at the word temporary. When the nurse returned with final paperwork, I saw Lily relax for the first time since she knocked on my gate. A plan existed. A warm place existed. Tomorrow had shape again. And as we prepared to leave the hospital, I understood the next truth. My mansion was about to stop being a monument to control and start becoming a home that would change under the weight of 2 new lives, while the rest of my world watched and whispered. The ride up the hill felt unreal, like the city had been erased and replaced with white space. Harper sat in the passenger seat, shoulders tight, hands folded like she was holding herself together by force. Lily, strapped in the back, pressed her face to the window and drank in everything with wide-eyed excitement. The closer we got, the more the estate looked like something built to intimidate weather itself. Stone walls, black iron, cameras that never blinked. When the gates recognized my vehicle and opened without a sound, Harper's breathing changed. I could feel it without looking at her. People like me forget what automatic access looks like to someone who spent her life asking permission from landlords, bosses, and overdue bills. I didn't touch her at the threshold when we arrived. No guiding hand. No pressure at her back. I stood a half step away and let her choose when to move, because help can feel like a trap when it comes wrapped in power. Inside, the house swallowed their footsteps. The foyer was too clean, too still, like the air had been trained to behave. Lily's boots squeaked on the polished floor and the sound startled her into a tiny laugh. That laugh hit me harder than I expected. I'd filled these rooms with silence on purpose for years. Hearing a child make noise in my house should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt like proof that something alive had finally crossed my gate. Mrs. Alvarez appeared the way she always did when something mattered, steady and practical, carrying a bag of essentials as if she'd been preparing for this her whole life. She didn't pry at Harper's story, or stare at her like a curiosity. She moved with the calm confidence of someone who understands that dignity is a kind of medicine. She guided them upstairs, not as guests being shown off, but as people who needed warm rooms and a predictable routine. The East Wing had been closed for so long I barely remembered it existed. That afternoon it opened like a lung, taking its first breath. Staff pulled protective sheets off furniture. Fresh linens were aired until they smelled like soap instead of storage. Heaters were adjusted room by room, not for efficiency, but for comfort. Someone quietly swapped out sharp-edged decor within Lily's reach and taped down a loose rug corner. I watched it happen the way I watched a crew prepare a safe house. Except this wasn't about hiding. It was about making space for healing. Lily explored as soon as her coat came off. She drifted from hallway to hallway like she was mapping a new planet. She introduced herself to the cook with the seriousness of a little adult, and then wandered into the kitchen again 5 minutes later, as if they'd been friends for years. She followed the gardener to the back door to stare at snow piled on hedges. She asked questions with her whole face, and the staff, trained to stay invisible, started smiling before they remembered they weren't supposed to. The first drawing appeared on the second day. A crooked house with a tall gate, a stick figure girl, and a man drawn bigger than the roof. It was taped to the wall near the staircase. No announcement. No permission requested. I stopped in front of it longer than I meant to, my coffee cooling in my hand, because I wasn't sure what it meant to be seen like that by a child. Another drawing followed, then another. Little bursts of color began to puncture the mansion's careful neutrality, and I found myself looking for them the way a man looks for messages. Harper healed slowly, like someone who'd been running on empty long before the flu hit. She slept in broken chunks, waking too fast at small sounds. A door closing too hard made her shoulders jump. A raised male voice from a security call in the hall made her go still. The first time Lily fell asleep early, Harper lingered by the bedroom doorway like she couldn't trust the peace to last. Waiting had become a habit, the kind that lives in your bones. My instinct was to forbid her from lifting a finger, to order her into bed and keep her there. But Harper didn't survive by being told to sit still. She started with small things, folding towels the way she liked them, organizing a pantry shelf, helping the cook chop vegetables while she sat on a stool. Every task was a quiet declaration. She was not property. She was not decoration. She was building a foothold in this place on her own terms. And I changed without admitting it. I started taking calls in my office with the door shut. I lowered my voice, not out of politeness, but because the house no longer belonged only to my temper. My footsteps softened at night. I stopped slamming cabinet doors. I began drinking coffee in the breakfast room instead of alone behind a desk, as if proximity could be casual. I came home earlier than I needed to, and told myself it was logistics, security checks, anything except the truth. I wanted to hear Lily's laughter echo down halls that used to feel like tombs. I wanted to catch Harper humming under her breath while she worked, a sound so ordinary it felt dangerous. Because in my world, attachment is a flare in the dark. Rumors kept moving through the city like wind under doors. Men I hadn't spoken to in weeks suddenly wanted updates. A rival doesn't need proof, he only needs suspicion. Some nights, staring out at the snow-covered grounds, I asked myself the question that wouldn't leave me alone. How long before someone tries to use this against me? By the end of the week, the mansion felt different. Warmer, noisier, imperfect in a way that made it human. Lily's drawings multiplied. Harper's color returned in slow increments. Mrs. Alvarez kept everything steady, and I kept listening to the outside world with sharpened instincts, because I could feel it in my gut. Whatever happened at the Velvet Crown hadn't been just sickness and bad luck. Something else had sparked there, and it was only a matter of time before it reached my gate. By the second week, the mansion had a rhythm that almost fooled me. Mornings meant kettle steam in the kitchen, Lily's sneakers tapping down the hall, Mrs. Alvarez moving like a lighthouse from room to room. Harper looked better too, color back in her cheeks, breath no longer shallow, but there were little pauses that didn't belong in a safe place. A chair leg scraping the floor would make her freeze mid-step. The soft click of a door latch would pull her eyes toward the sound, like her body was waiting for the rest of the memory to catch up. And whenever the Velvet Crown came up in passing, even as an innocent detail, her gaze would drift somewhere far away, like she was seeing a hallway that wasn't here. One night, I heard her footsteps in the corridor after midnight. Not heavy. Careful. The kind of walking people do when they're trying not to wake a child. When I found her in the dim light near the stair landing, she wasn't looking at the paintings or the windows. She was holding her own ribs like she was trying to keep her heart from escaping. She couldn't explain it in a clean line. She only knew she'd woken with a racing pulse and a taste of fear so sudden it felt borrowed. Over the next few days, the fragments started to surface. Not a full story, just sharp little shards. Harper remembered being exhausted behind the bar, the way exhaustion makes a room tilt even when you're standing still. She remembered voices that didn't match the crowd, too close to her ear, too calm for drunk men. She remembered being guided away from the bright floor toward the back, like someone had decided she didn't belong where witnesses could see her. The strangest detail was a door, a back corridor door that, in her memory, resisted when she tried it. Not stuck from age, but held, locked. She hadn't gone into the break room by choice, not at first. She'd ended up there because it was the only place her legs would carry her, and even then she had the sense that something had been shifted nearby. Something heavy moved out of sight. She described it like a sound more than an object. A scrape, a quiet drag. Then the feeling of being alone arrived too fast, like a light had been switched off behind her. Harper didn't want this to become my kind of problem. I could see that in the way she tightened her jaw after each memory. She wanted Lily safe, school normal, meals predictable, her own body steady again. The thought of being pulled into my world made her posture go defensive, like she could already feel invisible strings around her wrists. She wasn't asking me to hunt anyone. She was asking life to stop shaking. But I've survived by recognizing patterns before they become funerals. People who hide things inside my territory are doing one of two things: stealing from me, or setting a stage for someone to get hurt. Either way, it meant the Velvet Crown hadn't simply failed Harper. Someone had used the failure. So I ordered a quiet check. No announcements, no threats, just facts laid out like cards on a table. I had my security chief pull hallway camera timestamps from that night and match them against staff schedules. I asked for the night supervisor's signed room check sheet and the maintenance log for the back corridor locks. I told my people to treat it like a bookkeeping problem, because that's what it was. Numbers that didn't add up. They came back with a single, ugly line of truth. One camera in the service corridor showed a brief loop. Not long enough for amateurs to notice, just long enough to erase a minute that mattered. The room check sheet had the break room initialed at a time that didn't match the footsteps tracked on other cameras, and the night supervisor, the same one the manager blamed for being new, had signed off on the back rooms without ever walking down the hall. That wasn't laziness. That was convenience purchased. My anger returned so clean and sharp it scared me. Harper had been left on that couch like she was invisible on purpose, as if her fever and her collapse were useful to someone who needed her quiet. And Lily, that little girl who trusted the wrong man for the right reason, had been a few hours away from losing her mother because someone decided a missing bartender wouldn't matter. Now they weren't strangers in need. They were proof. Proof that I had a weakness people could exploit, and proof that someone had already tried. I didn't tell Harper the full shape of it. Not yet. She deserved recovery without the weight of my war on her shoulders. but I tightened the estate's security in ways she wouldn't notice. I started watching the gates like they were my own pulse. And I began pulling threads at the velvet crown with quiet hands, the kind that don't announce what they're about to do. Because the question wasn't if Harper had been overlooked. The question was why. If she had nearly been erased on purpose, what did she stumble too close to? And who benefits when a woman like her disappears without a sound? And as the first hints of Christmas started showing up in the city below, lights and music and fake warmth, I could already feel the shadow moving under it all. By early December, the city below my hill started wearing light like armor. Store windows glowed, lampposts sprouted plastic wreaths, and the sky went dark before dinner, turning fresh snow into a blue mirror. From my office window, I could see traffic inching through slush, families hurrying with bags, strangers holding doors for strangers. It looked harmless. It never is. In my world, every celebration is a cover for business, every crowd a place to hide a knife, every song a distraction. And I kept wondering when I started noticing those families instead of the deals being made around them. Inside the house, Lily treated the season like it was a secret she could barely contain. She came home from tutoring with paper snowflakes in her backpack and glitter on her sleeves, and she narrated every craft project with the seriousness of a scientist. She asked Mrs. Alvarez about cookies, about stockings, about whether reindeer could see through fog. The halls that used to swallow sound now bounced with her footsteps and sudden giggles. I pretended to be annoyed by the noise, but my body moved toward it anyway, like warmth, as if my own walls were learning new music. Harper smiled more, but her smile had breaks. When Lily talked about gifts, Harper's eyes did quick math, the same reflex I'd seen at the hospital when the doctor explained rest meant lost pay. She folded towels with military neatness, as if perfect corners could balance invisible accounts. She thanked the staff with careful restraint, never letting gratitude sound like surrender. Sometimes I caught her staring at the chandelier in the foyer, not impressed, just measuring what it must cost and what she could never repay. Hope, to her, looked too much like debt, and I understood that fear well. I surprised myself first by saying yes to a tree, not a small one tucked in a corner, but something that would stand in the main foyer where my men usually waited in silence. The house had never needed decoration to prove it was alive. Still, I approved boxes of lights, ribbons, and ornaments that looked like tiny planets. I changed my routine without announcing it, taking breakfast in the sunny room so Lily could show me her drawings. Each choice felt ordinary, which made it feel reckless. Ordinary is a mask I never wore in public until she arrived. The day we went to the tree lot, I left the black SUV at home and took a plain truck with no tint. Lily sat in the front seat like she belonged there, humming a half-learned carol. People stared anyway, not because they recognized me, but because a man built like trouble doesn't usually buy pine needles with a child. Lily kept her hand in mine while we walked between rows of evergreens, and that simple grip felt both natural and dangerous. If anyone was watching, I was handing them my target. I chose a tree like I chose trust. Back at the mansion, the tree scraped the doorway and dropped snow onto the marble, and Lily laughed like the mess was proof we were doing it right. By evening, the staff drifted in, first with professional distance, then with their sleeves rolled up. Someone put on soft music. Someone else handed out cocoa. Ornaments climbed the branches in crooked patterns, because Lily insisted the best ones should be where little hands could reach. I watched men and women who usually avoided eye contact with me relax around her, and the room changed shape into something that looked like home. Harper worked beside Mrs. Alvarez at the dining table, stringing lights and untangling knots with patient fingers. They didn't pry into each other's histories, but a quiet alliance formed anyway, the kind built from women who have carried too much and kept walking. Harper's gratitude stayed guarded, as if she was afraid the wrong word would turn this into a contract. Every so often, she would glance toward Lily, then toward me, and her eyes would ask the same question without sound. "What is the price?" "Missus." Alvarez answered with nothing but steady presence, and somehow that helped us all. Even with lights blinking in the foyer, my phone kept buzzing with quiet updates. A camera check, a schedule match, a name that needed another look. I carried the investigation like a hidden blade, but vigilance shows. Extra cars parked near the tree line. My men rotated posts. I scanned windows before I sat. Harper noticed. Her shoulders tightened when a new vehicle arrived, and she walked Lily to bed like sealing the night outside. She didn't demand details. She searched my face for one answer. Would Lily be safe? I wanted to promise it. I couldn't not yet anyway. On the night we finished decorating, the mansion looked like a different world. Firelight on garland, pine scent in the air. Lily asleep upstairs with glitter still in her hair. Harper stood in the doorway of the library, watching the tree sparkle as if it might disappear the moment she blinked. I felt the same fear, only mine had teeth. Warmth had filled rooms I kept empty on purpose, and now those rooms held something I couldn't replace. I realized comfort isn't the opposite of danger, it's an invitation. And somewhere beyond my gates, someone was deciding to answer it. Tests never announce themselves. They arrive wearing normal clothes and carrying ordinary paperwork, and if you don't have the stomach for patterns, you mistake them for weather. The first sign was a silence that didn't belong. A contact who never missed my calls let one ring out, then sent a message that read polite and empty. At the same time, one of my perimeter teams filed a report that looked routine on the surface. Tire tracks near the service road. Nothing stolen. No breach. But the details didn't add up. The tracks were too clean, like someone drove slow on purpose. The timestamp was too neat, like it had been rounded. By late afternoon, the city's chatter started to shift. My people hear everything. Bartenders, valets, accountants, the bored wives of men who think they're invisible. That day, the rumors didn't sound like gossip. They sounded like a finger pressing a bruise. Someone was testing the idea that Dominic Kane had softened. Not in public, not where I could crush it with a look. Through intermediaries. Through jokes that weren't jokes. Through questions dressed as concern. One of my lieutenants tried to deliver it to me like a harmless update. He mentioned a story floating around about a boss who carried a woman out of his own casino and forgot to return to his throne. He didn't say a name, but I felt the angle of it. The point wasn't to insult me. It was to see if I'd react like the old Dominic, the one who punished curiosity with bloodless certainty. If I overreacted, I proved the story mattered. If I laughed, I proved it didn't. Either way, someone would learn how close the target sat to my ribs. Before I could decide which mask to wear, the second prong arrived at my gate. A delivery van rolled up just before dusk, the kind that would disappear in any neighborhood. The driver had the right uniform, the right clipboard, the right board posture. The only problem was the delivery wasn't scheduled. My staff didn't order anything. My security logs didn't show a request. The van idled too long, angled slightly toward the camera that mattered. I didn't let Harper or Lily see it. I moved them deeper into the house under the excuse of hot chocolate and a movie, and I chose rooms without street-facing windows the way other men choose prayer. Lily followed happily, because she trusted routine. Harper followed with that quiet stillness of someone who has survived by reading air. Her eyes tracked the shift in my men, the new positions, the way doors closed softer but faster. That same night, a staff member who runs errands off-site came back pale and tight around the mouth. He hadn't been threatened. He'd been approached in the parking lot by a stranger who asked easy questions with a friendly smile. Things like when the little girl usually goes outside. Things like whether the lady of the house was still sick. It was framed as curiosity, but curiosity has teeth when it's aimed. Then the third prong hit where it always hurts. My business. At the Velvet Crown, a small operational mess appeared like a coin sliding under a door. A register drawer came up short by an amount too precise to be accidental. A back hallway camera showed a brief loop at the same timestamp my team had flagged during Harper's collapse night. And a supervisor who had signed off on a room check swore he had done it, even though the footage said he never walked the corridor. It wasn't sabotage meant to bankrupt me. It was sabotage meant to pull my attention away from my gates and back toward my empire. That's when I felt the coordination click into place. Someone wasn't just sniffing around my perimeter. Someone was playing the old chessboard and adding a new piece. My weakness. I tightened security without turning my home into a bunker. Quiet changes. Rotations that didn't repeat. Vehicles that swapped routes. Staff schedules that shifted so no one could predict when Harper would be in the kitchen or when Lily would be in the garden. I made sure Lily still got her bedtime story. Still saw Christmas lights. Still believed the world was safe enough to dream inside. But I also realized the brutal question underneath it all. How do you protect people without teaching them fear? Harper cornered me in the hallway outside the library after Lily fell asleep. Not with drama. With that steady spine she carries like a second heartbeat. She didn't demand my secrets, but she refused to be treated like furniture being moved for my convenience. She made it clear she could feel the house shifting, and she needed to know whether the danger was real or imagined, whether her daughter was about to become a pawn. I gave her honesty in pieces, because full truth in my world can crush the innocent. I let her know someone was probing, that it was connected to the night at the casino, that my people were handling it. I also let her know I would not use her or Lily as bait without her consent. The moment I thought that, I understood how far I'd moved from the man who used leverage like oxygen. Respecting her autonomy felt unfamiliar, but it also felt like the only way to keep my promise from turning into a cage. Later, alone in my office, I stared at the snow-lit city and felt something ugly in my chest. Attachment had become a handle. Someone could grab it and pull. I hated that. I hated that a child's laugh could be turned into strategy. But I hated the alternative more. I wasn't willing to go back to being untouchable if untouchable meant empty rooms and no reason to come home early. So I decided to set a trap of my own. Not a spectacle, not a war. A controlled countermove designed to reveal the hand behind the pressure. I fed a false routine through a channel I knew was compromised, then watched who leaned in. I ordered a quiet audit of the night supervisors and the camera techs. I instructed my casino manager to stage a harmless mistake in the back hallway and see who tried to exploit it, and I kept my house calm while my network became a net. By midnight, I had what I needed. A name that kept circling the blind spots like a shark around a docklight. Vince Mallory. A man who once ran protection contracts for me, until greed made him sloppy and I cut him loose. I didn't know yet whether he was the mastermind or the messenger, but I knew one thing for sure. The next step would decide whether this new family survived Christmas. Christmas Eve arrived the way trouble does in my city. Quiet at first, then all at once. Fresh snow sealed the driveway, and the iron gates wore white caps like they were pretending to be gentle. Inside, the mansion glowed. I had sent most of the staff home with bonuses big enough to make them forget my name for a week. Only Mrs. Alvarez stayed, moving through the kitchen with the calm of someone who has raised storms into mornings. Lily was on the rug by the fire, coloring with her tongue between her teeth, fighting sleep like it was a rival. Harper sat on the sofa, hair loose, cheeks still pale from weeks of fighting fever, eyes scanning the room like kindness might have a price tag hidden in the corners. I listened to the house breathe for the first time. Silence felt like mercy instead of control tonight. I had been planning this moment in secret, the way I plan raids and treaties, except my hands shook when I touched the small box in my pocket. I could have bought diamonds that made cameras blink, a stone loud enough to drown out doubt. Harper would have seen that as a collar. So I chose something simple. A modest band, one clear stone, not to show the world what I owned, but to show her what I was offering. Money has always obeyed me. I can purchase silence, loyalty, fear, even forgiveness that lasts until the next payment. What I cannot buy is belonging. I cannot buy the right to be trusted around a sleeping child, or the kind of peace that lets a woman stop listening for footsteps. Lily's knock at my gate cracked my armor, and Harper's dignity taught me how to hold the pieces together now. I waited until Lily's crayons slowed and her eyelids fluttered, until the fire settled into a steady hiss. Then I moved to the coffee table and lowered myself to the rug, not kneeling like a king granting favor, but sitting low so Harper would not have to look up at me. My mansion was built to make people feel small. I did not want that tonight. I told her, in the plainest way I knew, that I did not bring her here to rescue her. I brought her here because I could not stand the idea of her and Lily facing that cold alone again. I admitted the truth I hide from everyone else. I have been afraid since the morning Lily came to my gate, because once you care, you can lose. I asked Harper for the one thing I never bought, the right to try for us all. Her face changed in layers. First the softness, then the alarm, then the hard line of a woman who has learned what promises cost. I watched her do the math without numbers. My name, my world, the rumors outside these walls. I felt the imbalance between us like a shadow on the carpet. She did not reach for the box. She held her hands together, as if keeping herself from being swept into something too fast. I understood that fear. A yes could look like surrender. A no could look like danger. I told her I would not push. I told her she could say no and still stay safe here until she was ready to leave, because safety should not be a bargain. What I wanted was not obedience. It was truth. If she needed boundaries, I would honor them. If she needed time, I would wait, mean it. Lily saved us from our own spirals. Not with bargaining, not with tears, just by being 6 in a room built for fear. She looked up from her coloring and studied my face, then Harper's, like she was reading weather. She dragged her blanket to the couch and leaned into Harper's side with the kind of trust that comes from finally feeling warm. I watched Harper's shoulders loosen the way they did in the hospital when Lily climbed into her arms. Lily's calm filled the space where dread had been sitting. Harper did not have to picture my enemies in that moment. She only had to picture her daughter waking tomorrow and believing in Christmas without flinching. Something inside me settled into a simple vow. Whatever happens outside these gates, Lily will not pay for my life. I saw Harper hear that vow without words, and it softened her resistance. Harper finally let herself look at the box, and I could see her fighting the reflex to refuse anything that might chain her. She did not melt. She negotiated in the only way that keeps a woman whole. She needed honesty, not just protection. She needed boundaries that would be respected even when my world got loud. She needed a promise that work, dignity, and choice would remain hers, and that Lily would never be used to control her. I agreed, because for once my instincts and my conscience pointed in the same direction. When I opened the box, the ring looked almost too quiet for a night this heavy, and that was why it was right. I asked again, not as a demand, but as an invitation to build something real. Yes, arrived with fear and strength, I slipped the ring onto her hand and she did not flinch. Nothing exploded. No choir sang. The only sound was the fire and Lily's soft breathing as she drifted fully asleep. She slid off the rug and curled against my leg without asking permission, like my body had become part of the room. I lifted her carefully and settled back near the hearth, and Harper watched me with a look that held both warning and wonder. The ring caught the firelight when she moved her hand, simple and steady, like it belonged there. I felt relief, and right behind it, terror. I had chosen vulnerability on purpose, and my world would smell it sooner than morning. I promised myself I would protect them without turning their love into a weapon, without making my home a cage, without teaching Lily to fear the door. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing tracks, hiding paths. I knew daylight would bring new eyes and new questions. Christmas morning came pale and clean, sunlight sliding across fresh snow and turning my iron gate into something almost gentle. Inside, the house smelled like butter and coffee instead of polish and gun oil. I used to measure mornings by reports and threats. Now I measured them by a small set of feet racing down the hallway, and the way laughter bounced off walls that once only echoed my footsteps. I stood at the stove with a pan in one hand and a spatula in the other, learning that pancakes demand patience the same way power does, but without the fear. Lily watched like a tiny foreman, proud of every uneven circle that hit the plate. Mrs. Alvarez hovered nearby, not correcting me, just quietly preventing disaster with a towel and a knowing look. When I flipped one too early and it folded in on itself, Lily's delight filled the kitchen, and I caught myself smiling before I could stop it. Harper moved slower, still rebuilding strength, but she moved with purpose. The ring on her hand didn't change her spine. She wore it the way she wore everything she'd earned, grounded, cautious, real. After breakfast, she was already making lists in her head, planning what she could take on, what she could repay, how to keep her independence intact even while she let love sit at the table. I respected that more than any yes. It told me she wasn't here to be saved. She was here to choose. The mansion looked different in daylight. Lily's drawings were taped along the corridor like a bright little rebellion. Stick figures with oversized hearts, a snowy gate, a tree that leaned sideways, a man drawn too tall and too serious standing beside two smaller shapes. I paused in front of one and felt the strange ache of being seen without judgment. I had spent years making sure people only saw what I allowed. A child drew the truth anyway. The staff returned in the late morning, carrying trays, gifts, and that careful, respectful joy they usually saved for someone else's home. I felt their congratulations more than I heard them. They weren't shocked that I had softened. They were relieved, like the house had been holding its breath with them. Harper accepted their warmth with gratitude but kept her boundaries clear. She thanked, she helped, she did not perform. Outside the gate, the city did what it always does. It talked. Rumors multiplied the way snowflakes do, unique and impossible to stop. Some people decided I was playing hero. Some decided Harper was playing me. Some decided Lily was bait. I let them talk. For once, I didn't need the whole world to fear me to feel safe. I needed my home to stay calm. That doesn't mean I became naive. Security stayed tight, just quieter. Cars still patrolled, just farther back. I didn't turn the mansion into a bunker, because that would teach Lily to live scared, and it would turn Harper's hope into debt. Strength, I'm learning, isn't always the loud option. Sometimes it's choosing steadiness when chaos would be easier. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's simple, and it's uncomfortable. Kindness is not weakness. Asking for help can be bravery. Love isn't one grand gesture on a holiday night. It's the daily choice to show up, to listen, to apologize, to adjust your life so someone else can breathe. It's protecting without owning. It's letting ordinary moments become the armor that money and violence never were. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, and I won't pretend every problem vanished with a ring. We'll argue about schedules. We'll trip over new rules. We'll fix small things around the house and bigger things inside ourselves. We'll do school runs, doctor visits, groceries, and late-night talks when the world feels too sharp. One day at a time, we'll build something strong enough to live inside these extraordinary gates. Some mornings I still wake before dawn, listening for a knock that shouldn't exist. Then I hear a kettle, a child humming, a woman moving around the kitchen, and I remember. Peace is built, not found by us. And before you go, tell me where you're listening from, and what part of this story hit you the hardest. If you want more stories about second chances, unexpected family, and hope showing up at the worst possible time, please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in the next one.